Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good to be here for an adjournment debate. Some time ago, I asked the Minister of Housing about his, the terrible track record of his government, in that the cities that had all received significant funding from the so-called housing accelerator had collapsing housing starts. And the response that I had from the minister was quite astounding. He, in his answer, said that they're at near record housing starts, and questioned the whole premise, I guess, of my question, that there was anything wrong with the situation for housing. And I mean, it's quite astounding, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we have watched over the last 10 years as this government has presided over the collapse and evaporation of the dream of home ownership for Canadians, where young people despair over whether they will ever become homeowners. And we have seen in this country now that we have descended and become a country with two kinds of people. Two kinds of families, actually, Mr. Speaker. Families that already own real estate, wherein the parents can share the equity in their home one way or another, either through mortgages or by selling the home, or flat out just letting the kids live in the home, and families that do not own real estate. And the gap between the two is getting larger, and the despair among young Canadians is growing. So the answer that I got from the minister was extraordinarily tone deaf. But, Mr. Speaker, on Monday, we had a committee meeting at the Finance Committee, and we had experts testify at committee. And so I would bring to the minister's attention, or the parliamentary secretary that may debate me on this during this late show. We were told, just so that the Parliament now knows, Mr. Speaker, that in the GTA and Greater Horseshoe areas, pre-construction condo sales are down 89%, and ground-oriented home sales are down 70%. If buyers can't afford homes, they won't be built. So this is testimony from Mike Moffat of the Missing Middle Initiative. So hardly a conservative voice or go-to conservative witness, Mr. Speaker, but he has outlined just a brutal statistics on housing starts. Now, these are on pre-sales. So pre-sales today are the housing starts of 2 years from now. The testimony we heard also from Richard Lyle of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario corroborated this other testimony. Housing pre-sales down 90% in Toronto. This is a complete collapse of housing starts. The alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. And so this minister and this government are completely out of touch with reality when they take credit for the current housing starts. Housing sales and housing starts are in collapse amid a crisis over access to home ownership and affordability of rent, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how much time have I got left. Pardon me? 14 seconds. Well, I would invite the parliamentary secretary that's going to engage to familiarize himself with the testimony we heard at the Finance Committee if they're going to take credit for housing starts.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's important that we recognize, as the government and this Prime Minister has, in regards to the needs that Canadians actually have, in a very real and tangible way. In fact, our Prime Minister that was just elected 6 months ago has taken a number of initiatives to support home ownership into the future, Mr. Speaker. We could talk about the legislation that enabled first-time home buyers to be exempt from having to pay the GST. We can talk about the Canada Home Build Agency that's going to be there to ensure that we are able to meet the future demands on housing, Mr. Speaker. And that's in a relatively short time span that we've seen initiatives of this nature. If we were to do a contrast in terms of what it is that not only this government and this Prime Minister, the actions to date, but include over the last 20 years, where we take a look, whether it was Justin Trudeau or Stephen Harper. Actually, you can go even further back. You can talk about Jean Chrétien. You could talk even about Brian Mulroney. The worst government in the last 40 years, 50 years, dealing with the issue of housing was actually the government in which the leader of the Conservative Party served in. He sat around a cabinet when the Conservatives did absolutely nothing on the issue of housing. In fact, when the leader of the Conservative Party was the minister responsible for housing, get this, he built 6 houses. 6, Mr. Speaker. I would actually contrast the type of housing that we have been able to put together and work with municipalities, work with provinces to ensure that we could increase the housing stock, not to mention the many nonprofit housing organizations that are out there that we're trying to support. We have support towards housing co-ops and so much more, Mr. Speaker. We recognize, in particular, this Prime Minister recognizes that the federal government does have a role to play in encouraging and being in the housing sector. Contrast that to when the leader of the Conservative Party sat in government, sat around the cabinet table, in fact, when he was the Minister of Housing, where there was virtually nothing. And when I say virtually nothing, I'm being generous. At the end of the day, the member makes reference to the condos in Toronto. And if I would suggest to the member, take a look at the condos in the city of Winnipeg. Depending on the regions, depending in terms of the marketplace, if there is a surplus of condo development, which has been acknowledged in Toronto, I suspect that has something to do with the stats. In some areas, it might be weak. In other areas, it should be greater. If you talk about Toronto downtown versus what's happening in other communities around the city of Toronto, or even in Toronto, we have seen some downward direction of the price of homes taking place in Canada. There is a genuine concern. We are concerned. It's not to downplay it, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to be on the top of this particular file of housing affordability.
The honourable member for Calgary Crowfoot.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member invited me to contrast this government with previous governments, and I'd be delighted to. It is this government that has been in power for 10 years that has presided over the collapse of homeownership and presided over the doubling of cost to rent. The crisis of access to affordable, to housing that Canadians can afford is entirely of this government's making. When the leader of the Conservative Party was minister, we had a healthy, functioning construction and home and real estate sector where private sector builders built and supply and demand were in balance and wages were rising. I know the Liberals love the New York Times. They said that Canada had the wealthiest middle class in the world that could afford homes during the tenure of the previous government. This government has blown it.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Well, yeah, I'm glad the member wants to use the contrast. Contrast in terms of the last number of years, in particular the last 6 months, to when the leader of the Conservative Party had the hands and the ability to use tools to actually do more and chose to do absolutely nothing. And had the Conservatives done something back then, maybe we wouldn't have this current situation that we have today. And to try to say, you know, it was okay for the Harper government to do absolutely nothing and leave it up for the provinces and the municipalities to do all the work in terms of government assistance. Contrast to a federal government today that recognizes that it's not just the cities and the provinces that have a role, but we also have a role. I'll use that contrast any day. At least we have a government that's concerned and cares about Canadians and the issue of affordability. And yes, we will do better.